Pleasant evening to you, Miss Shaw and my fellow batchmate. We are Group 2. We will be presenting this afternoon on the topic Perception and Decision Making. Our group members this afternoon are myself, Sasha Gay Taylor, Patrick Francis, Kimon C. Wright, Tracy Ann Higgins, and Jody Ann Johnson. We'll start our discussion this afternoon by looking at what is perception. Perception can be defined as our recognition and interpretation of sensory information. It includes how we respond to information. We can think of perception as a process where we take in sensory information from our environment and use that information in order to interact with our environment. It can also be defined as the act or faculty of perceiving or apprehending by means of the senses or of the mind, cognition, understanding, immediating or intuitive recognition or appreciation, as of moral, psychological, insight, intuition, and discernment. Here in this photo this afternoon, in this presentation, we have a photo demonstration. This man holds a phone in his hand. In his hand, you can see varying amount of pictures going around in a circle. These pictures would demonstrate the perception of him holding a phone, illustrate the entire world around him by the click of a button or just him having his phone in his hand. So this is what perception is. It's about how we think, how we react. It's the outcome of our mind, what we think of. Alright, so this ends the definition of perception. I'll now hand over to Patrick for the continuation of our exercise this afternoon.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Francis, and I will be speaking to you on the matter of perception. Look, it's a duck. No, it's not a duck. That's not a duck. You're always seeing the wrong thing. That's a rabbit. In this slide, there are 3 images of persons seeing the same thing and having different perception on it. In the first photo, a gentleman sees an image and calls it a 6. But another gentleman sees the same image and calls it a 9. In the second image, there is an argument about whether or not the set of sticks is 3 or 4. And last but not least, I think that glass is half full. No, that glass is half empty. Alright, so in a nutshell, perception is the process that involves an individual organizing and interpreting their sensory impression in order to give meaning to their environment. It involves how we view our surrounding. So perception also had meanings to information gathering via the 5 senses and is the primary vehicle through which we understand the world around us and ourselves. There are 3 factors that influence perception that account for shaping or distorting perception. Alright. So the first one is in the perceiver. The second one is the characteristics of the target. And the third one is the characteristics of the situation itself. So for example, a man with a gun will stand and fight an incoming attacker, while the same man without a gun might run or take away himself, run for his life. Alright, so just to speak a little on the perceiver. A person's mood can have a strong influence on how they perceive someone or something. Perception can be affected by a person's motive due to need. A person's self-concept can affect their social concept. A person's focus can be influenced by their interests. An individual cognitive structure also affects their thinking or perception. And last but not least, a person's expectation can influence how they view or perceive the world around them. Alright, so as it relates to the characteristics of the target, a big role is played by physical characteristics as it relates to how we view others or perceive others. The perceiver pays attention to the target's physical feature, for example, estimated age. So, for example, a young man might feel as if he will win a fight between himself and an old man. Right. They also pay attention to a person's weight, alright, or a target's weight, race, gender, or height. Other things like motion, sound, size, and other characteristics of the target, which shapes the way we see them or view them. Right, so characteristics of the situation speak for itself. So the perceiver's impression of the target is based on the interaction between the perceiver and the target. Group 2 presentation surrounds perception and decision making. So we got a little situation here that I will read and then attempt to answer where necessary. So Monica feels that people who use plastic bags are insensitive towards the environment. She believes that people have a certain obligation towards their environment and should take it upon themselves to protect and preserve it. It also asks me to describe the factors that influence perception and state which factor is most likely to influence Monica's perception of plastic bag users. Finally, it also asks that I examine how perception affects decision making. So for me, Monica's perception is influenced by the factor in the perceiver. In the case study, we can see where Monica's self-concept was being affected by her social concept. She took up the stance that people are insensitive towards their environment, owing to how she feels as well as her belief. We also saw where her cognitive structure also played a role in her attitude towards persons who go against her belief or do the opposite of what she conceptualized. She believed that people have a certain obligation to their environment and should take it upon themselves to protect it. This concept could have been taken form during her childhood nurturing process or even in sometime in her adult state. Monica's perception is also affected by her expectation, which fall under the in the perceiver factor. It is evident that her expectation of people drives her attitude towards anyone who is contrary or opposes her belief. Okay, I will now hand back the presentation to Sasha Gay.
Thank you. Okay, I was asked to define how perception affects decision making. As it relates to decision making process, perception affects our way of thinking of how we deal with situations like making a decision. We may make decisions based on experiences because there are some that have already the knowledge on how they will respond to that situation. Additionally, it is the way we perceive the outcome of a situation which may have led to valid or invalid conclusions. Therefore, perception can have a positive or negative impact on decision making. Okay, so here again I have another picture illustration. It states, technically the glass is always full. And we can agree it's technically always full, so it can be filled with air as well as it can be filled with water. So either ways is half and half. The glass can be always filled with air or it can be filled with water. Alright, so I do hope that my definition here as it relates to how perception affecting decision making this afternoon was cleared. Alright, I now hand back over to our next presenter for this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Sasha Gay. Good evening, Ms. Shaw and my fellow classmates. My name is Kimoy Seavright, and I will continue the presentation by describing the rational decision-making model and explain how the model can be applied to the decision to terminate the use of plastic bags. The rational decision-making model. This model describes a series of steps that decision makers should consider if their goal is to maximize the quality of their outcomes. In other words, if you want to make sure that you make the best choice, going through the formal steps of the rational decision-making model may make sense. There are 6 steps to the rational decision-making process. I will be explaining 3 of them, and Tracy will speak to you on the other 3. 1. Identify and define the problem. 2. Identify the decision criteria. 3. Allocate weights to the criteria. 4. Develop the alternatives. 5. Evaluate the alternative. And 6. Select the best alternative. The scenario was earlier read, and Monica believes that the people have a certain obligation towards their environment and should take it upon themselves to protect and preserve it. In identify and defining the problem, I identify the problem as being environmental hazard. Environmental hazard is a substance, state, or evidence which has the potential to threaten the surrounding natural environment or adversely affects people's health, including pollution and natural disaster such as storms and earthquake. The second step of the rational decision-making model is to identify the decision criteria. What are some of the important things to think about before making the decision? 1. Health of human, wildlife, and marine life. Global warming, which is the same as climate change and air pollution. Public awareness. Biodegradable material. How will consumers be affected? Expense and replacement. I will speak to you on about 3 of these. I will explain what I mean when I say you need to identify the decision criteria. After identifying the decision criteria, weights must be allocated to the decision criteria. This means ranking which criteria is the most important to the decision-making process. When allocating weights to the decision criteria, the decisions must not change. Based on the decisions that were identified earlier, we are just weighing these decisions. So using numbers from 1 to 7, where 1 is the most important. At number 1, it would be health of human, wildlife, and marine life. Number 2, global warming. Number 3, expense. Number 4, biodegradable material. Number 5, replacement. Number 6, how will consumers be affected? And number 7, public awareness. After weighing the criteria, let me explain to you some things that we need to know before we terminate plastic bags. When we terminate plastic bags, the other bags that we are going to use, how will they affect us? How will they affect global warming? If we're going to use other reusable bags or recycled bags, we need the factory to make them, and global warming, pollution, and climate change harm many people, wildlife, and our environment. Global warming, also known as climate change, is caused by a blanket of pollution that traps heat around the earth. This pollution comes from cars, factories, homes, and power plants that burn fossil fluids such as oil, coal, natural gas, and gasoline. Global warming pollution knows no boundary. It enters the atmosphere, spread across the globe, and trap heat around the earth for 50 to 200 years after it is emitted. This is why we need to reduce global warming pollution, because our children and their children will still feel the effect of global warming for years to come. When we speak of biodegradable, this refers to the ability of materials to break down and return to nature. In order for packaging products or material to qualify as biodegradable, they must complete breakdown and decompose into natural elements within a short time period, typically a year or less. Before we terminate the plastic bag, we first need to find out how many people already use reusable bag, whether they are always taking them to the shop, and what items they put in them. Do people generally know how many times each type of bag should be reused in order to be an environmental better choice than the current plastic bags? When we use reusable bags, we need to know how many times to bring them around, how many times to use them, because if we use them 1 or 2 times, they take a long time to break down. So we need to take these things into consideration. Thank you very much for listening. I will now hand over to Tracy Buchanan.
Thank you. As Kimoy stated before, we allocate the weights to the criteria. Now we need to think about the alternative. What do you think is the best choice for the environment? Well, the choices that we have here is calico, canvas, cotton, paper, degradable plastic, and bullock. We have 6 alternatives here. Which one do you think has less impact on the environment? Okay. Now we need to evaluate and see which one has the less impact on the environment. Let's take a look at this video.
Basically, there's 3 things you need to think about: how the bag's produced, how many times you'll use it, and how you can dispose of it. If your aim is to reduce the amount, they're made from plastic, whereas biodegradable bags are made from cornstarch or other plant material. These bags meet Australian standards and break down into carbon dioxide, methane, biomass, and water. Now, we've all seen these before, the green bag. They're made of a heavy-duty, non-woven polypropylene. Basically, that's a type of plastic, which is a byproduct of oil refining. But even though it's a product of fossil fuels, it actually doesn't take that much energy to produce, which means you'll only need to use these bags 11 times to break even with the single-use bags. The drawback? Like the degradable bags, they can break down into microplastics if they find their way into the environment. Canvas tote bags are another popular option. A lot of tote bags nowadays are made of 100% cotton. Because of this though, it's a pretty energy and water intensive option. Basically, it requires a lot of water to grow cotton. Almost 8 million litres of water for every hectare in Australia. And from a climate change perspective, you'll need to use a tote bag at least 131 times before you'll make up for the extra energy needed. But the good thing is, you can use them hundreds or thousands of times. They're washable and, most importantly, they're biodegradable. Paper bags aren't very common in supermarkets anymore, but they're still used in other retail stores. Unlike plastic bags, paper bags break down easily and don't accumulate in the ocean and other environments. But that's also part of the problem. Once you get them wet, they're hard not to tear, and you need to reuse them a few times to balance out their global warming potential. Hessian or burlap bags are a more sustainable choice. Hessian is made from the fibres of the jute plant. It's second only to cotton in terms of the amount produced for commercial purposes, and it requires little pesticide, herbicide, or fertilizer. More than air consumes about 15 tons of carbon dioxide, which is stored in the plant and fibre, and it's also 100% biodegradable. Some jute bags are lined with plastic though, so that's something to keep an eye out for. So there are heaps of alternatives, and some are better than others. Yes, you will need to use them a fair bit to make them worthwhile. But remember that in the long term, the best case scenario is one where we don't use non-degradable plastic bags at all.
Based on the evaluation that we just did, we realized that all the alternatives have negative and positive impact on the environment. So we need to choose one of these alternatives that we think has less impact on the environment. I will go with canvas. Why? First, canvas is strong because it was made from tight woven, so the fabric is strong and more durable. Calico is made from light woven, so it's not as strong as the canvas. And remember, the main objective here is for us to come up with an alternative, a bag that will last a lifetime and also eco-friendly. The canvas bag is also biodegradable. It contributes to pollution, yes, but because the bag is made from raw plant-based material, it allows the natural bacteria and fungus in the environment to make the decomposing process easier. So using the rational decision-making module, the new alternative to replace paper bag is going to be the canvas bag. Long-term solution to climate change, and also it will secure a future for human, marine, and also wildlife. Now I'm going to hand over the presentation to Jodian, who is going to give you some information on the decision-making styles and the difference between them.
Thank you for that introduction, Tracy. Good evening, Ms. Shaw and fellow classmates. My presentation for this evening will be on the styles of decision making and how they differentiate. Firstly, we will be defining decision making. What is decision making? Decision making can be defined as the process of making choices by identifying a decision, gathering information, and assessing alternative resolutions. This definition is taken from Dartmouth 2019. Decision making depends on numerous factors such as the individual's personal skills, perceptions, the culture of the organization in which he or she operates, and the overall culture of the country. There are 4 types of decision-making styles: directive or autocratic decision-making, analytic decision-making, conceptual decision-making, and behavioral decision-making. Directive or autocratic decision-making can be described as the process in which the leader takes total control of the decision. As a result, they are the ones responsible for any positive or negative outcome of this decision made. This type of leader does not request suggestions or ideas from their team members. They use their own knowledge or perception of the situation. An example could be in the army, where the government makes all the final decisions without consulting any of the soldiers, and that directive has to be executed without any questions whether it is a rational or irrational decision. The next style we'll be looking at is analytic decision making. So unlike autocratic decision making, autocratic leaders don't possess the information they need in order to make an effective decision. So therefore, they have to gather information from their employees or team. There are times when the employees aren't aware of the problem at hand. However, the employer evaluates the information obtained from the employees and make a decision. For example, say an employer wants to know if managers in the company will make a difference in the performance of their employees and the company. That employer then gives a survey to answer the question at hand in order to make the decision. Conceptual decision making, on the other hand, involves the leader explaining the situation to the group, and together they evaluate the situation and look for possible solutions. This type of leader does not normally shy away from decisions. They are normally very intellectual and make decisions based on facts. And this decision is normally long term. Because of this, the information has to be well researched, as there is no room for errors. One example of this is, say, an owner of a magazine or newspaper consults their reporters for ideas of what to publish in the next release. They would hold a meeting to discuss this information. The reporters would then gather the information based on a situation that occurred, say, the week before or the day before, and then it is evaluated by both the employees and the employer, and then a decision would be made. In contrast to the other decision-making styles, behavioral style of decision-making has low tolerance for ambiguity and is very intuitive. The manager will engage the team in a discussion and responds to the mood of the team members. They will make a decision on what feels right and what will motivate the team to perform more effectively and efficiently. However, there is no room for doubt. So the discussion has to be clearly communicated, and this will avoid conflict, as it is important for them to be accepted by others. For example, an employer would like to motivate the employees by choosing employees or employee of the year. They would, however, prefer to have a discussion with the staff about the selection process to ensure that the decision is fair.
Right, so that concludes our presentation. We will be asking a question. The winner will get a phone card valuing $200. Please go ahead and submit your answers in the chat. All right, so the question is, what are the 4 styles of decision making? Group 2 want to thank you again for being a wonderful audience. Have a phenomenal evening.